I'm an Orthodox Christian living by myself on the banks of the Anchor River in my log cabin in North America's farthest west, Highway Point. And in answer to your requests, I finally have a Starlink that's sitting in that box there on my couch. But it's so cold, I'm not going to put it up yet because I want to install it right. So have patience with me, but like I always tell you guys, it doesn't matter if you can see my ugly mug, because what's important is that I read for us. Because I'm not looking to ingratiate myself or to do something prideful for myself. And just be glad that I'm not wearing a paper bag over my head just so that you can only listen to the words and not worry about me or what I look like. God bless. Forgive me, brothers and sisters. The first reading that I'm going to read for us tonight is called Free Spirit, Memoirs of Father John Krestyankin of his fellow prisoner, by Vladimir Cabo. In July 1950, after 9 months spent in 3 Moscow prisons, Lubyanka, Lefortovo, Butriskaya, I found myself in the village of Urtsevo, the center of the Karopolag, in the south of the Arkhangelsk region. The territory of the camp stretched for hundreds of kilometers from here, almost to Arkhangelsk. It included dozens of separate camp points, OLPs, and hundreds of imprisoned slaves worked in each. A month later, I was sent to the 16th camp point, located 30 to 40 kilometers from Yurtsevo, near the village that bore the symbolic name of Cherny. On one of the railway lines that took out timber harvested by a prisoner, the camp was surrounded by forest. The northern lights swayed in the sky above it on winter nights, and white nights began in May. Here I was destined to live until the summer of 1954. And we think we have it hard. Imagine that life. Most of the prisoners were convicted under the so-called domestic articles. Article 58 of the Soviet Criminal Code, I believe, is what most of them were arrested under, which basically could have you arrested for anything for being a subversive agent, contrary to the Soviet collective. Many former collective farmers and workers, a smaller part, were political prisoners, and I belonged to them. In the same barracks lived the head of the canteen, a former manager from Georgia, a Konpark worker, and a former Catholic priest from Kaunas, an orderly at work, a historian from Riga, and many other people of different nationalities and very different destinies. The Soviet concentration camp reflected the entire huge Soviet Union with all its complex, tragic history. And I, still a recent student from Moscow, if I had not been there, probably would have never had the opportunity to meet all these people and to get close to some of them. Our barracks were the same as the others. Inside, on both sides of the long passage, there are 2-story bunk clapboards. Besides tables, bedside tables between them. Under the ceiling, bare electric bulbs, a black dish of a radio loudspeaker. The voice of Moscow sounded almost continuously. It was in this station I remember in the spring of 1951, that I met Ivan Mikhailovich Krestyankin for the first time. I will always remember how he walked with his light, swift gait, not walking but flying, along the wooden walkway to our barracks in his neat black jacket, buttoned up with all the buttons. Both in appearance and behavior, he differed sharply from the rest of the prisoners. He had long black hair. The prisoners were cut bald, but the administration allowed him to keep it. He had a beard, and here and there his hair was shining with incipient gray. His pale, thin face was directed somewhere forward and upward. I was especially struck by his eyes, the inspired eyes of a visionary. He was somewhat similar to the philosopher Vladimir Solovyov, as we know him from the surviving portraits. Ivan Mikhailovich, this was his name in our camp life, and this was my name, settled next to me on the neighboring clapboard. We quickly and firmly became close, and I learned that before his arrest, he had been a priest of one of the Moscow Orthodox churches. In my letter to my parents, dated May 3rd, 1951, and my camp correspondence with them has been preserved, I write that among the people around me there are people who are morally and spiritually lofty. They are a model for me in my daily life and help me enrich my life with authentic and valuable content. I do not mention names, but if Father John was already there at the time, then these words refer primarily to him. The meeting with Father John played a great, perhaps fateful role in my life. It was not accidental like many things that happen to us on our life path. I was prepared for this meeting. In my memoirs, Road to Australia, I tell of the awakening of religious feeling I experienced at the front. This feeling flared up again in me in prison and camp. Many years later, the death of my first wife and the shock that I experienced brought me back to Father John, and again he came to my aid. Thanks to Father John, I read the Bible in the camp. It was he who gave me this great book, and I read it in its entirety, from the first page to the last. My parents also tried to satisfy my interest in the history of religion and spiritual culture, which has never left me since. My mother brought or sent books from our home library or bought from the second-hand booksellers. The History of Religions by Xantippe de la Saxe, which interested Father John, was passed on by my mother through the faithful parishioners who visited Father John in the camp. Of course, we did not eat only spiritual food. For a long time, Ivan Mikhailovich and I even ate together, and in the camp conditions, this testified to great closeness and mutual sympathy. This was partly facilitated by the fact that both of us received regular parcels, I from my parents and Father John probably from his former parishioners. As I remember, Father John worked in accounting. He was an accountant in the world as well. He was extraordinarily conscientious about any work to which life called him. I observed him in the camp in the same way. This extraordinary man had the ability to attract people, to arouse love for himself, and this is because he himself loved people. When he spoke to you, his eyes, his whole face lit up, radiated love and kindness, and his words sounded attentive and sympathetic. There are probably few people in whom the deepest essence of Christianity, expressed in the simple words, God is love, would be manifested with such fullness and power. Love for God and for people, this is what determined all his behavior. This is what he spoke about, flying and rushing forward. He was not a preacher. Divine power acted through him. That was why he seemed to be all glowing. Such an impression he made on me and probably on the other people around him in the camp. It was the power of charisma, grace, the vessel of which he was and felt himself. Such a person, such a priest in those years was doomed to end up in prison and camps. He was too attractive even there, on the outside, and the authorities tried to stop his influence on people. Father John was a Christian in the full sense of the word. For him, there was neither Greek nor Jew. Racial and national differences did not matter to him. Xenophobia and chauvinism were deeply alien to him. And each person he saw, first of all, a man. He strived to discern in him, not his bodily, and not even his soul, but his spiritual nature, that which makes a man of one nature with God. The dignity of the human person was the highest value for him. A Jew was as close to him as any person of any other nationality. Christ's disciples were Jews. The first Christians were people of many nationalities. Christianity is open to the whole world, and this openness was carried within Father John. He also saw a man capable of accepting and carrying the divine light in himself in a hardened criminal. And in this respect, there was no difference between people for him. I have observed this trait of Father John many times. I have seen with what openness and love he speaks to a professional thief, perhaps to a person who carries a heavy burden of past crimes. This, I think, was the greatest meaning of his stay in the camp. Father John was characterized by delicacy, intelligence, and great inner care. There was something of an old Russian intellectual in his manners. A remarkable feature of his mental makeup was his sense of humor, love of jokes. To a joke devoid of sarcastic mockery, sarcasm. His jokes did not hurt anyone, did not offend anyone. This trait is generally characteristic of people who are spiritually pure. The ability to joke and laugh without malice is akin to genius. By the way, it has also brought Father John closer to Vladimir Solovyov. I recall his remark related to a camp lunch in a commercial canteen where you could dine for money. Ivan Mikhailovich, what's in the dining room today? Beef, miranton, and pecan sauce. Father John was not a man, not of this world. It would be a mistake to say that he was a stranger to politics. He was not and could not be indifferent to what was happening in the world in his own country, but he understood both politics and earthly affairs in general in some higher sense. He looked at them in sub specie aeternitas, a winged Latin expression translated from the point of view of eternity. In relation to God and eternity, I remember how well he met me in the unforgettable days of March 1953, days marked by one of the greatest events in history, the death of Stalin. Father John met me near our barracks. He, as always, was not walking, but as if he was flying. He had a newspaper in his hands. He was seized with joyful excitement. Look, the dream of the Russian people has finally become true. And he showed me a photograph on the front page of the newspaper, Stalin in a coffin. Hearing this, I thought, who but Ivan Mikhailovich knows his people? If someone had told him then that 50 years later, according to a sociological survey, almost every second resident of Russia would approve of Stalin's activities, I will not discuss this phenomenon here. I will not look for an explanation for it. I think that Father John, who was born and raised in a native Russian religious environment, a witness to forced collectivization, monstrous repressions, violence against religion and the church, the destruction of churches and monasteries, could he have thought differently about his people? After Stalin's death, something began to change in the camp regime, and then Ivan Mikhailovich left our barracks. He and another prisoner, an elderly man, were allowed to settle in a dugout, dug I don't remember by whom and when, on the territory of the camp, and now they lived in this dugout together. One day, Father John invited me to his place. I went down a few steps and saw a small room, dimly lit through a window just below the ceiling. The walls are sheathed with wooden blocks, two-story bunks, a table covered with a tablecloth, a bedside table. I don't remember the icons. I think they were not on the walls so as to not worry the authorities. Extraordinary cleanliness, order, comfort. It must be said that Ivan Mikhailovich, everywhere, in whatever conditions he was able to create a special atmosphere of neatness, cleanliness, and splendor around him. What I saw was a real underground cell, an amazing phenomenon in the conditions of a Soviet camp. I can imagine what the possibility of such solitude meant after the barracks for Father John, who from a young age felt a calling to the monastic way of life. But he was not destined to live in these conditions for long. At the end of summer 1953, he was suddenly taken away. I wrote about this to my parents in early October and again in a letter dated October 23, 1953. I wrote to you about the departure of Ivan Mikhailovich Krestyankin and asked you to inform me about his future fate. We had good relations and I was sorry to part with him. Saying goodbye, I gave him my thermos. It could be useful to him in the new unknown life that awaited him. In 1954, I left the 16th OLP and moved to the Commandant's camp in Yurtsevo. And in the August of the same year, I was released under an amnesty and returned to Moscow. In his memoirs, Heat of Your Hands, Anatoly Krasnov-Levitin tells about a meeting with Ivan Mikhailovich in the Kubyashev invalid camp, where he was brought from the Karog Polag. Father John was released from this camp in February 1955. And one of the letters from the camp which became available to me thanks to the courtesy of Anastasia Goryanova Borisova, Father John mentions the Volga, which he admires from afar and regrettably recalls our life at the 16th OLP. I find myself in a completely different life situation in many ways, sharply different from the previous one which I often recall. The year and place of departure are not indicated in the letter, but it undoubtedly refers to the autumn of 53 and was sent from the Kubiashev camp. In 1955, soon after his release, I met Father John in Moscow. I learned of his liberation from the same woman close to him to whom we had kept in touch. We met in the apartment in which he then settled. I again studied at Moscow University at the Faculty of History, which I was not allowed to graduate in 1949. My interest in religion remained. I remained faithful to it throughout the rest of my life. I was especially concerned about the problem of the original religion. I wanted to understand how the idea of God arose among our distant ancestors and how it appears in the minds of modern peoples who preserve a primitive way of life. When I returned to the university, I immersed myself in the study of world ethnological literature. I dreamed of writing a book about primitive religion. I wanted to share my thoughts, the idea of the future book with Father John. Father John listened to me attentively. He approved the path of life and science I had chosen and blessed me to carry out my plan. Many years have passed since this conversation. All these years working on other scientific topics, I went to the work I had conceived, thought about it, accumulated the necessary materials, and wrote individual parts of the future book. And only in 2002 in Australia, my book, The Circle and the Cross, Reflections of an Ethnologist on Primitive Spirituality. The leading idea of this book has not changed since the day I met Father John back in 1955. Basically, it remained the same. This is why I can now say that this meeting was one of the most important events in my life. It determined the direction of my scientific research, helped me to implement my long-standing plan. 20 years passed after this meeting, and this is one of the most difficult trials brought to me by Father John, the illness and death of my wife. This happened in 1976. I lived and worked in St. Petersburg at the time. I knew that Father John, now the Archimandrite of Pskov Caves Monastery, was a deeply respected and revered. 20 years had passed since this meeting, and this time one of my most difficult trials brought me to Father John, the illness and death of my wife. This happened in 1976. I lived and worked in St. Petersburg at the time. I knew that Father John, now the Archimandrite of the Pskov Caves Monastery, was a man who was deeply respected and revered. And here I am within the walls of an ancient monastery. I see Father John. He's grown old, but his movements are still the same. Fast, soaring, young. His gaze is still the same, deep, penetrating into the soul. I see him in the cathedral during the service. He invites me to his monk cell and then to the monastery garden, and we sit on a bench, and below at our feet the whole monastery. And again, we have a leisurely conversation about life, about God, about faith, as once, many years ago, within other walls. I visited Father John several more times, and on his advice was baptized there. In the monastery after these meetings, I felt renewed, ready to continue my life. I never met him again, but the memory of Father John, of Ivan Mikhailovich Christiankin, is always with me. It lives in me wherever fate leads me, no matter what happens to me. I have not seen him for years, but it always seemed to me that he invisibly accompanied me on my life and spiritual path. In the difficult days and hours of my life, I took support in him. We continue the conversation that was interrupted many years ago. Canberra, 2008, by Vladimir Cabo. February 17th, 2026. God bless you, brothers and sisters. Thanks for joining me. God loves you all so much more than I'm worthy to express. Open your heart to God and talk to him. God is a personal relationship. Our belief in God isn't something superficial. It isn't just a meditation. It just isn't empty whispering into the universe. Our connection with God is real. It's touching. I hope that you all get a chance to go to church this weekend. I just got back from church a little while ago. It's so important that you go, and I hope that you go to an Orthodox church. I don't want you to go to a Catholic church because there's no papal infallibility. Every one of us are wretched and unworthy sinners. And being a Christian isn't easy. I don't want you to be a Protestant or listen to prosperity teachers. This is why I want you to learn about orthodoxy and become a part of an Orthodox church. Because I want you to have that personal relationship with God. It's real. It's not something fake. I feel so bad when I think about how many people in the 80s and 90s were led astray by all these prosperity preachers that were basically just telling you lies and feel-good things, feel-good slogans to try to get you to give them money so that they could buy jets and mansions and compounds. It's so detestable. I love you all, brothers and sisters, so much, and God loves you so much more than I'll ever be able to express to you. So much more than I can even wrap my mind around understanding. There's so much mystery that's yet to be revealed to us. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for joining me tonight. I don't know if I'll be back on again tonight or not. Tomorrow we have a liturgy in the morning. And I also have to go meet my boss at 10:30 in the morning to help unload some goods that I need for work. I love you all, brothers and sisters, and I'll either see you again a bit later or I'll see you tomorrow afternoon sometime. Reflect on God. Actually, before I go, let me read some of the ascetical homilies from St. Isaac the Syrian so we can reflect on this. I'm going to try to read one of these every single night, just some of it, because it's kind of like reading the Philokalia. It's not something that you just sit down and read. You read something, and then you take that good seed into your heart and meditate on it and let it grow. Give it a place in your life. On the senses and on temptations also. When the senses are chaste and collected, they give birth to peace in the soul and do not allow her to experience strife. And whenever the soul has no perception of external things, victory will be gained without struggle. But if the soul should grow negligent in this matter, she will not be able to remain secure. And after a perception is entered, she must fight hard to expel it from herself. However, her first state of limpid purity and natural innocence are lost. The majority of men, if not all the world, for this reason, depart from the natural state and that limpid purity which is prior to the knowledge of diverse things. On this account, the more men are involved with the world, the more it is difficult for them to regain limpid purity, by reason of their knowledge of many evil things. Only one man among many can once again return to his primordial state by another means. But simplicity is far better than the diverse ways of obtaining forgiveness. Fear is necessary for human nature in order that it might keep within the bounds of obedience to God. But the love of God incites a man to desire the works of virtue, and through love he is caught away to the doing of good. Spiritual knowledge naturally comes after the performance of the virtues, but both are preceded by fear and love. And again, fear precedes love. Whoever says with presumption that it is possible to acquire the most perfect virtues before he accomplishes the elementary has, without a doubt, laid the first foundation for the ruin of his soul. For the Lord's way is the most perfect. For the Lord's way is that the more perfect be born of the former virtues. Do not exchange your brother's love for the love of any fleeting thing, because love conceals within itself him who is more precious than all things. Abandon what is small that you may find what is great. Spurn what is superfluous and without value, that you may discover what is truly valuable. Become as one dead during your life, and you will not live unto death. Give yourself over to death in your struggles, rather to live in heedlessness. For martyrs are not only those who have accepted death for their belief in Christ, but also those who die for the sake of keeping his commandments. Be dead to the world and alive to God. God bless you, brothers and sisters. Good night.